Now in this that I declare unto you, I praise you not, that ye come together not for the better, but for the worse. As we've already noticed, but this charging I give you, I praise you not. He had praised them in verse 2 in regard to that charging that he was giving to them. Here, he says, in giving a charge unto you, I praise you not. Why? Because you come together not for the better, but for the worse. Well, what were they coming together to do? Worship God. Specifically here, to partake of the Lord's Supper. And that should have brought unity, greater unity on their part. But instead, it was resulting in division. That's what he says in verse 18. For first of all, when you come together in the church, I hear that there be divisions among you, and I partly believe it. So their coming together should have brought about a greater unity between them. And I think, really, if I miss the worship services on the first day of the week, that's true on Wednesday night as far as I'm concerned, but especially is that true on the first day of the week worship service. If I miss that, I miss a great deal during the week. It brings me closer to my brethren. I just look forward to getting there, and I'll have to admit, the past couple of months, I've had some problems where I haven't felt like seeing anybody or talking to anybody or being around anybody to a great extent. I felt bad. I felt sick and nauseated. I do all day long. But I look forward to putting my arms both around the men and the women and maybe giving the woman a little kiss on the cheek or something like that and showing my love and affection for them. And that's genuine, and receiving the same from them. It brings me closer to it. And that's what it ought to produce. Not only giving worship unto God, but it brings us closer together. There's a unity that's developed there in such worship services. But he says, that's not the way it is among you brethren at Corinth. Instead of it being for the better, it's for the worse. And I'm not going to praise you in this because there are divisions. Well, first of all, this is the first thing I'm going to find at fault with you, is what he's saying. When you come together in the church, this word come together, expression come together, is a form of the same word from which we get synagogue. And synagogue is a coming together. But he's not talking about the synagogue, of course. He's talking about a coming together and assembling together in the church. Now, the word church, as we've noticed on a number of occasions, is from the Greek word ekklesia, writing it in our English. And ek is out from within, and kaleo is to call. So a called out is literally the meaning of the word church, the called out. You've been called out of the darkness of this world into the marvelous light of God's dear Son, 1 Peter 2 and verse 9. The called out. Well, and there are other passages that could be given, but we've studied that on other occasions, and actually that's not our particular study at this time. It's the called out, the church, as it's commonly translated into our English text. And this word, ecclesia, or this word church, or this expression, the called out, has a number of different applications or meanings in the Scripture. We speak of the church universal. Well, that idea is not found, or that word for express statement is not found in the Bible. We speak of the church local. When we speak of the church universal, we're talking about the church wherever it might be found throughout the entire world. I've got brethren who I don't even know, members of my family that I've never met and probably will never meet. That's the church universal. They're in all parts of the world. And then there's the church local. I know you brethren. We associate together. We work in a particular congregation, and that comes down to a congregational expression. Congregations, I'll put it. I know members of the church, don't know all of them, over here at 10th Avenue. I know members of the church over here at North Fayetteville, and I know members of the church over here at North Side. I know members of the church over here at S Avenue, and Boca Raton and Indiantown and what have you. I know some of my brethren in these congregations, and that's in a local sense. All right, we generally recognize that and don't have difficulty with it. And in the individual congregation, of course, you've got elders and deacons and what have you. Now, the word church is used in another sense sometimes. And that's the way it's used here in 1 Corinthians, the 11th chapter. He says, come together in the church. It's used from the standpoint of assembly. And that's the way that he's using it here. Or in verse 20, when you come together, therefore, in one place. In verse 18, he says, come together in the church. Verse 20 says, come together, therefore, in one place. What's he talking about? He's talking about in the church from the standpoint of an assembly. We go into an area and we say, where's the church of Christ? Well, that shouldn't be said technically, legally. We ought to say, where does the church of Christ meet? That would be technically correct. But we know what the individual is saying. He's using the expression church in an accommodative sense. He may be talking about this building. That would be completely unscriptural. We do speak of this building as the church. This isn't the church. But generally speaking, we're speaking accommodatively. Where does the church assemble is what we're saying. We're not saying, where is... I've wanted to do this on many occasions. Someone comes up to me and says, where is the Church of Christ? Oh, well, let's see. One of the brothers lives over here on 35th Street, and another brother lives over here. Huh? That's not what he's talking about. What he's talking about is where does the church assemble? All right, we assemble here at 1111 36th Street. And so we're using the word church from the standpoint of assembly, and that's the way that it is used quite often in the New Testament. So it may be used in regard to this idea, universal, or it may be used in regard to this idea, the local, congregations or congregation. Here he's speaking about the assembly. When you come together in the church, in the assembly of the saints, I hear that there be divisions among you. The word divisions here is the Greek word schemata, schismata. Right in a minute. C-H-I-S-M-A-T-A. Schismata. The accent on skis. Schism is the English word that comes from this, but divisions is a good way of expressing it. I hear that there's schisms. I hear that there are factions. I hear that there are divisions among you. And I partly believe it. Now, it's impossible to know from the Greek whether this has, first of all, the idea of, I believe it, of a part of you, not of all of you, or I believe it only in part. Why? Because reports generally are exaggerated. Isn't that characteristic of man? He always exaggerates. I've told you a million times, don't exaggerate. We exaggerate things, especially if it's bad. Always exaggerate if it's bad. And so I partly believe it. I believe it in part. I don't believe all of it that I've heard about the divisions that exist about you because they've been exaggerated, or I believe it only of a part of you there in the church. I don't believe all of you have divided yourselves from the others. For there must be also heresies. Now, this is the Greek word H-A-I-R-E-S-E-I-S. And the accent on the E. Hereses. Heresy is the English word. Almost it is an anglicizing of this Greek word. Heresy. Sex is another way. Sex. Another way of saying it. All right, there are divisions among you, or there are schisms. Schisms among you, there are factions among you, there are sects among you. And he said, these things must be. Why must they be? Well, Jesus, I think, in Matthew, the 18th chapter, and verse 7, tells us a reason for it. He says, there must be offenses, but woe unto that man by whom the offense comes. Yeah, you're always going to have offenses, and you're going to always have divisions. You're always going to have schisms. You're always going to have factions. You're always going to have difficulties in your relationships one with another. They'll ever be there. And don't look for a flowery bed of ease and roses and a paradise on earth where these things don't exist. They're going to be there. They must be. Because sin is in this world. But he says, you woe unto that individual by whom they come. Don't you be the one that brings them into being. Well, there must also be heresies among you, that they which are approved may be made manifest among you. All right? We're going to approve ourselves or disapprove ourselves according to how we individually react to these divisions, these schisms, these factions, these offenses, these problems, these difficulties. You know, it's hard for the individual who's even on the right side to remain in an approved relationship with God. Even if you're in the right, it's hard to remain free from sin. Attitudes develop that shouldn't be. Reactions develop that should not be. Quite often in counseling people, they come to my office with some problem, and usually it's a problem of interrelationship with others. And throughout the discussion, and it doesn't really take hold in the beginning, but it does later on in the discussion, I say, well, that's their problem. Your problem is how you react to it. So-and-so did thus and so to me, and I just can't appreciate it. Well, what so-and-so did against you is his problem or her problem. How you react to it is your problem. Don't let, because of the sin committed by thus and so, to bring about a reaction on your part that brings forth sin. Let him be responsible for his sin. You be responsible for a correct attitude toward it. And don't let his sin bring you into sin. Put the problem where it belongs. All right? In these heresies, there are those who will manifest, make known their approvedness before God, and that their actions, their attitudes are correct. When you come together, therefore, into one place, well, in the fact that we come together into one place, and this is a necessary inference, people are always asking, well, what is necessary inference? Here's necessary inference. You've got to have a place in which you meet. You've got to have a place that's been set aside, prescribed for the worship that he here speaks about to God. You come together into one place. You're not scattered here and yon and there. We have some of our brethren who have advanced the idea, well, I can meet in my home and have fellowship with the brethren on the first day of the week just as surely as going down there into the assembly. Not so, says Paul. You come together in the church. You come together in one place. You don't remain at your home, and I remain at my home. This one remains at his home, and we have fellowship one with another on the first day of the week, in that we individually and separately partake of the Lord's Supper and the other acts of worship. No, that cannot be. Now, we might be providentially hindered from meeting with our brethren, but the responsibility rests upon us if we're in good health and can, not providentially hindered. We meet with our brethren, we assemble with them upon the first day of the week to engage in these avenues of worship. We have to be there. He says, when you come together, therefore, into one place, this is not, you'll notice this is italicized in the King James, it's not a part of the original text, is not to eat the Lord's Supper. What you're doing, you're partaking of the Lord's Supper. Yes, there is some physical expression of partaking of the Lord's Supper, but you're not eating the Lord's Supper. Kind of same discussion, is he a child of God or isn't he a child of God? Well, he's a child of God from one standpoint, but he's not a child of God if he's not living as a child of God, sure. Is he a member of the church? Yes, he's a member of the church, but he's not a member of the church if he's not living as a member of the church, sure. Is he partaking of the Lord's Supper? Yes, he's partaking of the Lord's Supper, but he's not truly partaking of the Lord's Supper if he's not eating the Lord's Supper as it should be eaten. That's what Paul's saying here. You're not eating the Lord's Supper. Oh, you're going through something that's called the partaking of the Lord's Supper, but it's not truly eating the Lord's Supper. For in eating, everyone taketh before, others italicized, his own supper. And one is hungry and another is drunken. Now, they were partaking the Lord's Supper in connection with a common meal. Can you imagine something like that? What if we came together upon the first day of the week, and since we meet early in the day, generally speaking, or kind of midday, isn't it? We decide, well, we're going to have brunch together. And in connection with our brunch, we'll partake the Lord's Supper. How would you react to something like that? I know how I'd react. Unfavorably. Very quickly. And yet that's what they were doing. They were having supper together. And then partaking of the Lord's Supper in connection with that supper. What in the world would lead them into such as that? You've heard the expression love feast? Well, that's what they were. They were intended to bring about love and harmony and greater unity between the brethren. We've got some of our brethren doing that today. And in connection with it, then they partake the Lord's Supper. The love feast. What would... All right, I'm sure the rest of you in the back couldn't hear what you said. It said if you're in services of worship and or in the church and you have the wrong attitude, and you know you have the wrong attitude, and yet you partake the Lord's Supper. All right. All right. And you know you have the wrong attitude and you eat the Lord's Supper, then what? Sinning? Definitely. No. But what you need to do is change the attitude. Yeah. Now, we're not talking about whether or not you're worthy to partake of the Lord's Supper. We're talking about the attitude being wrong in partaking of it. In regard, that would be true in regard to anything. Singing, praying, taking the Lord's Supper, giving of our means. Paul's going to deal with the attitude in regard to each of these. And he says, if your attitude's wrong in regard to any of these, the worship is, I'm using my word, in vain, not accepted. Well, I wouldn't ever suggest that. Just like I wouldn't suggest somebody, one member of church, staying home from these services of worship to which he has no part and are not applicable to him in any respect. See, we've made our evangelistic thrust on the basis of our worship services. And really, the non-member shouldn't even be there. You get down to a technical application of it. It doesn't apply to him. He has no part in it. He's not in any way even recognized by God as being there. But we've used it as an evangelistic thrust. And yet, I would never encourage someone who wasn't a member of church not being in those services. Why? Because the very influence of this service can bring about a change in his life that's demanded. And Paul also shows that in this 1 Corinthians letter. I tell you, this is the most up-to-date, practical, applicable book in regard to the affairs of the church that can be read in the New Testament. Everything with which we deal today, generally speaking, is dealt with by Paul today as far as the assembly of the church is concerned. This is the only place in the New Testament where it's dealt with. People are always asking me, well, why isn't the covering discussed elsewhere? Because the assembly of the saints on the first day of the week is not discussed elsewhere. That's fine. This is the only place that it is discussed. And he answers the problems that we face today. The attitude has to be right, or else that worship is in vain. It's worthless. But I would never encourage someone who had the wrong attitude not being there, because then something else develops along with the wrong attitude. Then they get into a habit of not being there, and it's going to make them twofold more of a child of hell. And their attitude has an opportunity of being changed only as they come in contact or under the influence of good. Of course, again, I think that's where the mercy of God comes in. We can wake up with a bad attitude, go to services with a bad attitude, but we're trying to correct that bad attitude. Then, as long as there's an attempt being put forth by the individual, you can't get mad in a split second and in a split second get over the man. You might get mad in a split second, but you don't get over the mad in a split second. And members of the church sometimes get worried about what if I die in that moment after I get mad and I'm sinning in my attitude until I can correct it. That's where the mercy of God comes in. You're trying to overcome it. It takes a while to overcome, and so forth. And the same thing's true in regard to the attitude. You may have the wrong attitude, but if you're trying to overcome it, then I think, again, in light of the teaching of the Scripture, that's where the mercy of God comes in, and your worship would be accepted. Or I get to you. She's had her hand up there. Well, that's what we're going to get into. Paul's talking about attitude here in regard to the Lord's Supper. You eat and drink damnation unto yourself if your attitude in regard to the taking of that supper is wrong. Not the doing of the supper, the attitude in regard to it. And, no, I know. And then in the 12th through the 14th chapter, he speaks of the attitude in regard to singing, and he's speaking of the attitude in regard to the prayer. And the 16th chapter, and tie in with it 2 Corinthians, the 8th and 9th chapter, the attitude's wrong in connection with the giving. No. No, he doesn't say don't do it. No. You teach. Yeah. Well, that's teaching. Edify. You strengthen, you build up, you edify your brother. That's right. There are so many things that come into this. For example, I've had members of church say, well, I'm not going to go to that class because I don't get anything out of it. Well, I think that attitude is almost, no, I won't say it. That attitude needs to be worked on. Because whether you get anything out of it or not, you should be taking into consideration your brethren and what they may get out of your very presence there. Your presence is an encouragement to them. You're to be thinking of them, strengthening them. Your presence there may be of help to the teacher. Maybe he needs help. You might need more help than we ever realize. And your presence can be of help and a strength to him, and so forth. We're so self-centered and selfish that we lose sight of sometimes the fact that as Christians we lose ourselves for the benefit or the encouragement and the strengthening and the help of others. We don't think of that. Now, there are many other things that are into that as well. All right, back to this. He says, for in eating everyone taketh before others his own supper. One is hungry and the other is drunk. Why, again I ask, but why would they in any way think of having the Lord's Supper in connection with a meal? Don't think of the background of the Lord's Supper. It was brought out of the Passover feast. And what was the Passover feast? It was a feast. The family met together and ate together, a feast. Now, in connection with that feast, they ate bitter herbs and etc., the Passover lamb, and there was a memorial there. But in connection with that feast, then the Passover meal was likewise partaken of as a memorial. It was at the Passover feast that Jesus instituted his supper. And so it would be very logical, very natural for the brethren to associate the partaking of the Lord's Supper with a feast. And in the early church, that's what they did. Now, in connection with that, at least in Corinth, that's what they did. In connection with that, Paul said, well, you're not even taking others into consideration. You're just eating your own supper to the exclusion of others. You've got division. There's no unity there. You take before others his own supper. You're not eating a common meal together for unity's sake and partaking of the Lord's Supper and connecting with that. Why, you've divided yourself. I've got my meal, and you can have your meal. And if you don't have enough to eat, it's tough. One is hungry, and another is drunken. Let me ask you something else, and I don't want to get into too much discussion in connection with it. Another is drunken. Would this not indicate that the fruit of the vine that they were using, at least in Corinth, was wine? If they got drunk on it? And the condemnation is not the fact that they were using wine in connection with the Lord's Supper, but the fact that they were getting drunk with it. And in connection with the Lord's Supper, that they had a hunger for a supper rather than having the right attitude as to why the Lord's Supper was being eaten. A memorial to the Lord. The reason I bring that up, we have brethren in Birmingham. We have a number of congregations in the Birmingham area that use wine, or at least did, presumably still do, use wine on the Lord's Supper. A number of congregations in the Kentucky, Tennessee area, and some in the Arkansas area, where they use wine on the Lord's Supper. In Italy, they use wine on the Lord's Supper. I don't know about all the congregations in Mexico, but some of them use wine on the Lord's Supper. And a lot of our American brethren are very disturbed by that, and immediately would condemn it as being illegal or contradictory to the Scriptures. Well, evidently there was wine being used here, and Paul didn't condemn the fact that there was wine being used in connection with the Lord's Supper, but rather the fact that they got drunk on the wine that was being used at the Lord's Supper. Me? No. I would immediately. I have. I know, that's what I'm talking about. We are prone to judge things by our background or by our heritage or by our customs rather than by law. And that's what I'm getting at. We've had brethren who have come over to Italy and have just really created the biggest stinks. Start to say problem. They're stinks. Imaginable. Because the brethren in Italy don't do like the American brethren do. Last time I was over there, one of the good guys got up and he, in English, because they had a lot of American visitors that day, he made just a beautiful, very beautiful presentation. I was amazed at how kind and how yet forceful he presented. Yet, we have a number of visitors with us today from the States. We're so grateful for your presence. We recognize that in the States you're accustomed to doing things a little different to how we may apply ourselves here in the country of Italy. We hope that you will be charitable toward us. And then went on and finally led up. We use wine on the Lord's Supper. And the reason they did that and deliberated upon it for 15 minutes is because some of the Americans, immediately would go back. I'm going to write you up in the Gospel Advocate, and I'm going to see that every support that's being given here is going to be cut off, and this and that and what have you. And just the biggest stink that you could imagine. I remember one man that went over there to work. He lasted about 2 months. Sad to say, he lasted 2 months. But the first thing he did when he touched Italian soil, and I was there at that time, he's one of our experts from the United States, was he was going to set everything right. And the fact that these Italians were using wine on the Lord's Supper, well, he was going to get that changed immediately, I never saw a man that created so much havoc in such a short period of time as that expert from the States. And thanks be to God, he left for Australia within 2 months. Decided he'd better work elsewhere. And everyone in Italy breathed a sigh of relief. But anyway, they were eating their own suppers, and they were getting drunk, and all this in connection with the Lord's Supper. Now, what? Have you not houses to eat and drink in? Or despise ye the church of God, and shame them that have not? What shall I say to you? Shall I praise you in this? I praise you not. Now, have you not houses to eat and to drink in? This has been wrestled completely out of its context, to where some of our brethren say, well, now, if you eat and drink in the church building, then you are sinning. Paul says, do you not have houses to eat and drink in? Paul's not talking about that, and I think even a superficial reading of the context will show Paul's not talking about that. Where does the church assemble in this day and time? Generally in homes, private homes. And the very place where they were taking the Lord's Supper, and where he says, have you not houses to eat and drink in, was where they had houses to eat and drink in, that very place. Paul is talking about attitudes in worship, and the fact that there are certain things that apply to the home and certain things that apply to the church. Doesn't make any difference whether the church meets in the home or not. In Italy, when we first began work in Rome, I began to work in Rome. The church met in my home. That's where we met. On the, well, I started to say 13th floor. It was on the 7th floor, but you had to climb up 13 flights of stairs to get there. And that's where we met in our worship to the Lord. It was the house in which we ate and drank in. But Paul wasn't condemning that. He's condemning the attitudes. Cheryl? That was what I was talking about when I said I didn't want to get too deep into that discussion because it's another discussion. No, my views on that, which have been expressed in classes, but not vocally from a public standpoint, I think our position generally in connection with wine is untenable scripture. Now, don't go out of here, please, and say Bill Hatcher says it's all right to drink wine. But I think our position, generally, in regard to that, what the Scriptures condemn, invariably is drunkenness or to excess. Now, I do not believe that gives us a license as such for social drinking. I am opposed to social drinking, but not on the basis of the Bible says it's wrong to drink wine. That's what I am not agreeing to. I believe our brethren deal with that subject emotionally rather than scripturally. All right, our time's up.